Our next conversation is prosecutorial abuse and the rights of the citizen with Attorney General Matt Whittaker and Representative Graham Filler. Please welcome them to the stage with a lot of honks.
All right.
Guys, we got a great topic here, and we're talking about justice reform, and maybe it's not a typical campaign topic, but really the crux of it, and I know I can get a honk out of this, is can we get government off the little guy? Is that something you agree with? Honk on that. And so, you know, the Trump White House has been leading on this from the start. Why? It's common sense. It's your individual liberties. And it's good for the people, not just for Michigan, but for America. It's good for the little guy who struggled. So we've got Matt Whittaker here, and maybe you just want to talk about how you, working in the Trump administration, seeing that, cut down on prosecutorial abuse, and, you know, cut down regulations too.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I think to some extent, you know, the piece that this president has led on the most is common sense justice reform, and it's evidenced by the First Step Act. You know, I was the acting attorney general when it was passed, and what it did is essentially, you know, bad guys should be in jail, but you know, there has to be some rationality to the relationship between the crime and the time that people serve, and there has to also be an acknowledgement that once somebody has paid their price to society and has been rehabilitated, you know, they aren't stuck in and warehoused in prisons at the taxpayer's expense once they've been rehabilitated. And so this president, through the First Step Act on the one hand, and also through his exercise of his constitutional pardon powers, which I've seen firsthand in working on a project in that regard, I think that those two items have pointed the way to doing some of these things in restoring individual liberty, and to making sure, you know, that prosecutors don't overreach, that, you know, that they do what's necessary to maintain law and order. Because I'm as many of you that are here tonight, you know, I am certainly aware of what's happening in our major cities, and not only are you seeing what's happening in Portland or in Seattle, where this lawlessness and this rioting and looting is happening, and a lack of law enforcement and law and order, but I'm also seeing, you know, major city crime go up in places like Chicago. And so, you know, we need to be very smart about how we do law enforcement, how we enforce the laws. Violent criminals should be locked away for as long as necessary to protect citizens, because, you know, one of the fundamental things that we all agree on is that every child should be able to sleep safely in their own bed, like Legend Talifaro, you know, couldn't in Kansas City, 4-year-old that Project Legend was named after, and at the same time, that every child should be able to play in their front yard. And so this is why we have law enforcement, but at the same time, you know, we need to be smart about it, and we need to make sure that, again, that we respect individual liberty.
Yeah, so one thing we want to talk about when we talk about justice reform, and Matt and I both agree, and I know you're going to honk, we support law enforcement 100%. And so honk if you do. I know you do. Safe communities, a stronger country, a stronger communities, 100%. But we also support proportional laws that don't overburden people. So is there anything else specific you saw in D.C. about cleaning up prosecutorial abuse that you want to share with everybody?
Yeah, I think that, you know, obviously the Department of Justice has a very large prosecutorial and law enforcement arm, and it was an honor of a lifetime to serve and to tell the men and women of law enforcement that we had their backs and they had our thanks. And at the same time, you know, this president obviously was very keenly aware and wanted to make sure that the Attorney General and the line prosecutors all up and down the Department of Justice, you know, exercise their discretion, which is actually very, you know, it's a very broad discretion.
Yep.
To charge individuals with crimes, and to make sure you exercise that in a reasonable manner that didn't abuse that power.
I want to just tell you right now, you live in a state, actually you're in a district right now, which had a prosecutor who used funds that were forfeited for his own personal gain. And of course, he's been removed from office. But, you know, that's not a good look. That's not what we want out of law enforcement and prosecutors. And I know you saw some of that, folks acting out of line. You also live in a state in Michigan that's been a nation leader on expungement, getting people a cleaned up record so they can work so they can provide for their families, so they can get housing. Has been a leader on civil asset forfeiture reforms, where law enforcement used to be able to just come up and sort of cut a deal on the side of a highway. We won't charge you, but we get your car and your money. And they used it to further sort of interest for locals. That's not how the justice system works.
No, it's not. And civil asset forfeiture is an area I think we could still do some reforms. I think, it's still, the system still, I think, has too much of a bias towards the government and seizing people's property, taking their money, taking their assets. I think we need to probably spend some more time. Legislators, especially like you, need to spend more time in making sure that balance is on the right pivot point, and it isn't subject to being abused or overreaching by prosecutors and by the police. And again, I mean, these are all things that, if the legislatures would do their job, if Congress would do their job, that we could fix probably pretty easily. That you could get the right people in the room to explain how a system would work that doesn't infringe on people's liberties and property rights, but at the same time takes ill-gotten gains away from criminals. And it's it's not that hard, but it seems like it's an area that we just need more political will to get it done.
Yeah, so one thing I want to tell you, and you can be very proud, Republicans have led, and it was right at the cusp when Donald Trump got in, and he really helped. We've led on justice reforms because we're balanced. We support law enforcement, but we support fair laws and not an administrative behemoth. And so Republicans have led because we're balanced. We're talking about Amy Coney Barrett a little bit out here too. And if she gets in, when she gets in, what we're talking about there is common sense laws and reading of laws versus activism. And that's a big difference. Yeah. And I know you saw that in D.C.
100%. And this is, as someone that's spent some time studying politics and political theory, this is an interesting discussion between the libertarian wing of the Republican Party and the conservative wing of the Republican Party. And I see people like Mike Lee and Ted Cruz that don't necessarily agree on some of the kind of where to draw the line, but that's they're certainly both in the right place. You don't want Dick Durbin, for example, to be the one to draw this line, because it'll be a squiggly line that won't make any sense, and then it'll give way too much power to unelected judges and bureaucrats instead of maintaining the power in the people through their elected representatives.
Yeah, so we want to thank you. It's non-traditional issue, but we have a non-traditional president who's led on that, and there's a lot of people who are out there. Maybe they have a criminal record, and they say, you know what, Donald Trump's in D.C. and he's working for me, and he's working to ease the administrative burden. So that's a really cool thing to serve under a president like that, who will take an issue and highlight it at the Super Bowl. Do you know what the first commercial was?
Yeah, it was Alice Marie Johnson, and Alice is a good friend of mine. Been working with her on a project to find people that are currently incarcerated that are good and worthy receivers of the presidential pardon or commutation authority. I'll tell you, the other group that we need to give a real shout out to is the American Conservative Union, who is putting on this event, and who has been a leader for years on criminal justice reform, on making sure that sentencing laws make sense, that that judges have enough discretion but not too much in the federal system and across the state. Because I've looked at this issue, and while there are specific cases where you can point to a result that was not the best result for that individual in that circumstance, but the law demanded it, or the sentencing guidelines, the states is where the significant reforms need to happen. And I know that the ACU has been involved in a lot of the states' efforts to reform some of their criminal justice laws to make sure that they work, and that again that they work and balance individual liberties with protecting citizens from violent criminals.
Yeah, this is what I hear. It's so important. ACU has led on this because what they said from the start is we're changing the conversation. It's not tough on crime versus soft on crime. It's just a smarter proportional justice system. So we as Republicans are so good at saying, let's cut government, let's look at every byline. But why weren't we like that in the justice system? Well, now with Trump and leading state governments like here in Michigan, we are. So I'm State Representative Graham Filler. I'm leading here in Michigan on some of the justice reforms. I'm proud to work with the Trump White House and with Matt Whittaker. Did you want to say anything in closing?
No, the only thing I will say in closing is something that you said at the beginning, which is we are not, and it can never be confused with the full throated support for the men and women of law enforcement who have a very difficult job. And we need to make sure that when they charge somebody with a crime and that person's done the crime, that it isn't a revolving door of justice. But at the same time, we need to make sure that people serve long enough, but not too long. And that's an exercise of everybody's powers, not only the legislator in writing laws that make sense, but also making sure the executive exercises their powers, especially at the federal level, but also at the states. You know, governors have powers of commutation and pardon oftentimes under state constitution. So it is being smarter than maybe we have in the past, where this sort of balance of justice swings back and forth, and sides accuse each other of being soft on crime or tough on crime. That's not what it's about. It's about protecting our children, protecting our communities, protecting our property, but at the same time making sure that we are rehabilitating, punishing, and doing all the kind of things as to why we have a criminal justice system in the first place.
Yeah, amen to that. All right, guys, you serve under a non-traditional president who's taken justice, turned it into a great issue. Thanks so much for having us. Let's honk for Trump.